Yes, we're going to start in the Big 12. How, don't
Amazing.
say that we don't have the diversity of college football, the pulse of what's going on. Texas Tech lands a 5-star offensive lineman, Felix Ojo, I don't know how to say it, Ojo, reportedly making $5.1 million. We'll also talk about Big 12 Media Days here in just a second. Some things Yormark said, some things that, even Texas Tech's head coach is saying. But we obviously know that Texas is very heavily funded, and our Texas Tech is very heavily funded. We look at their softball starting pitcher. We look at what reportedly their athletic department is paying this year in excess of $50 million. Reportedly, they want to compete. They want to win. But man, going up against some of the powers that also spend money and landing a 5-star offensive tackle. We don't dive super deep into recruiting on this, so I don't really care from that angle. But the investment level is pretty impressive.
I think the Ojo situation is fascinating. I'll allow Cole to elaborate more on what it's like within the conference, because it is a conference that is wide open for the taking, and we can get into that more. But I think this is such an interesting step in the grand scheme of college football, because it's a 3-year, fully guaranteed revenue share deal. So we've kind of migrated in a handful of ways. One, fully guaranteed money. Now, it's not that we haven't heard that before, but mostly that was for quarterbacks. And this is very much an NFL model now, and that you saw in the National Football League. Who do you pay? You pay passers, people who protect your passer, and people who rush the passer. So it's natural that an offensive tackle, a 5-star coming out of high school, still is going to be commanding potentially guaranteed money if they believe in the evaluation enough that they're going to put that type of money into them. I love that it's a 3-year deal, fully guaranteed. I don't know what the language of the deal says, if he's allowed to transfer or not, but I really think this is a positive step for college football in terms of preventing guys from just leaving and doing a Bear Alexander every offseason. I think this is a really nice step. The guaranteed money, obviously, they're throwing around a lot of cash, and I think a booster to the tune of $4.1 billion sold his oil industry within the last few years. So Texas Tech has some money to play with. The interesting part, again, to me, is that it's not described as an NIL deal. It's described as a revenue sharing deal. And that's where I think we're moving towards, is more of these schools are going to start embracing revenue sharing. And it also is potentially going to protect them in terms of how much they're actually going to owe players, which I don't love, but it's a way for these schools, conferences, whatever, to protect themselves and protect the money that they make. So if they like Ojo enough and they think that he's really going to be a stud offensive tackle for years to come, good for them. But I find this to be a very curious step in a world of college football with NIL, upcoming cap space, Deloitte, the CSC, all these things still have yet to be completely implemented. So we're still getting things, quote unquote, under the wire. So I like this step. I'm very intrigued by it.
Have you guys watched any of the TV show Landman?
Love it.
I've not.
Okay, so you know who Monty Miller is, right?
Yes, sir.
And then you remember in that one scene where he's talking to Billy Bob Thornton and his kids are home, and he says, the greatest accomplishment that I got was getting my daughter to follow in my footsteps and go to TCU. That literally is what Cody Campbell is doing out in Lubbock right now. He is the billionaire that is funneling in money and has sold multiple pieces of his oil property to guarantee that there is a big revenue spare in college athletics for Texas Tech out in Lubbock, which is why they were able to go out and spend money in softball. It's why they were able to go have one of the more aggressive transfer portal classes of this past season. It's why they feel very confident in spending money on these 4- and 5-star talents that they can outwork. And the thing that I love about this more than anything else is that we are seeing the guaranteed money and the actual contracts that are being implemented. So many times we hear behind closed doors what a player is getting paid. We hear about what deals are being done with certain NIL properties and what the actual collectives are willing to offer here and there. This is one of those times where we know when Felix Ojo walks onto campus, whether or not he ends up panning out, whether or not he ends up being an All-American, whether or not he ends up wanting to leave and transfer and there has to be a buyout clause in there. He is guaranteed to make $5.1 million over a span of a 3-year period. And I think that's good for the sport because we know what these teams are spending their money on. We talked last week about Georgia getting rid of its NIL collective. This week, we're hearing that more so. This is the money that a team is willing to spend on a certain player and set the market at, to where if other teams want to come on in, this is what you're going to have to spend just to even get into our ballpark. And that's per year. That's not just in terms of, a one and done, take a flyer on a kid. This is a 3-year negotiation period where you're locked in. And for my money, just to be completely transparent, I love this for college football because of it still keeps the priorities of anyone can win any given year alive. We spend so much time talking about the SEC and the Big Ten, and for good reason. They win it 99.9% of the time. You throw in a Clemson every once in a blue moon, and then maybe a Notre Dame or insert TCU Cinderella season here, but your national title is pretty much set because of the two conferences. This is a way to guarantee that we keep the proximity of we have to have eyes out in Lubbock, Texas. And then eventually it won't be Lubbock. It'll be Tempe, Arizona, where Arizona State will be spending a lot of money. And if it's not Tempe, Arizona, it'll be Stillwater, Oklahoma, where Oklahoma State is spending a lot of money. And if it's not Stillwater, Oklahoma, it's going to be Fort Worth, Texas, where TCU gets their own real life Monty Miller to come on in and spend that type of money around Sonny Dykes. This is the good part about college football, is that you have somebody that isn't attached to one of these prominent programs that wants to see his team be successful. And you know what? If we talk about buying a championship, I understand $20 million last year to Ohio State. A lot of it was internally paying off players to not go to the NFL. But you help buy a championship. And it's not because of you didn't develop the right players. It's that you were able to retain the right players. Everything has a price in today's life. One of those things to win a championship is to make sure you get the right players. The only caveat is you have to have the right personnel to elevate them to the championship pedigree.
I think something else that's very interesting about this is the fact that it's been pointed out as a rev share deal. And I just wonder with their budget why this was designated as a rev share deal as opposed to trying to save yourself some cap space and maybe spread that money out elsewhere. Or was it strategic, right? Like, hey, we can do some under the table 150 here, 300 here, but our big one that's going to get flagged, if anything's going to get flagged, we're just going to be upfront and tell them like, hey, this is a rev share deal. This is how we're splitting up funds. I don't know. I think the number's 20.5 million, but from what I've been told, the number is actually closer to about 18.5 million because you got to pay some of that 20.5 to back at past athletes. So if you're using up, what do they just use up roughly a little more than a tenth of it. And that's just for football, right? Like you're thinking, what are you paying Kennedy? What are you paying some of these other athletes? They had a team in Texas Tech was in the Final Four, Elite Eight. They had a pretty good basketball team too. Like they compete in a lot of different big time athletics. So if you think, well, if you've got 18.5 million, say you even put 15 into football, I mean, you just gave him a tenth of it, right? And so how do you split that money up over the rest? Or kind of what is that balance of NIL, rev share? I don't care, right? Like I'm not a proponent of like, oh, we need to have a hard cap. I mean, I'd love a hard cap. I don't think that's really enforceable, maybe is the right way to say it. But I wonder about it being a rev share deal only. It doesn't matter to me how they designate it because I'm sure they're going to spend more than whatever that 18.5 million is on their athletics budget for paying players. But I did think that part was pretty interesting.
I think there's a lot of things we're still going to deal with in terms of the McDonald's bag full of money. We talk about that all the time on the show. I don't think that's going to go away necessarily. I think the cap is going to be really interesting for a lot of programs. And I was just talking about this on my podcast, State of State, a Penn State football show, about On3 providing evaluations for the class of 2026 for a number of Big Ten schools, saying that on average, a Penn State class of 2026 recruit is making $57,000. Oregon, the average is $234,000. So I'm super curious to see which teams are set up to manage a budget and manage the cap space, and which schools have been spending like crazy and are going to get to a point where, oh man, we overshot on an offensive tackle potentially to the tune of $5.1 million. Not to say that Ojo's going to be a bust or anything, but like anything is possible in this sport. Also, like, how much do you allot to your quarterback room? Who is your starting quarterback? Is he a big time name that transcends just what he does on the field, a la Arch Manning, something like that? The list goes on and on. There's so many headaches that I think are going to come up for these programs in terms of how do they budget this? Because it's not quite Moneyball, but it's about to be. And there's a lot of schools, Penn State, my alma mater, that have been kind of doing that for the last few years. They might be better set up to handle a budget than schools like a Texas Tech, who have been just going absolutely crazy on a spending spree.